Hello, History and Heritage Explorers. In this next series of videos, we're going to be exploring some of the historic sites of the American Civil War. So please sit back and enjoy. We are now at the historic Bethany Cemetery here in
Brice's Crossroads in the town of Baldwyn.
So this is Mr. Elliott, and he's going to be showing us around this historic cemetery.
I'm glad to. This sign was put up before the Bethany Historical Center. This is to show that the only grave site is full of Confederates. It used to be of Union and Confederate KIA, or killed in action of the battle, but years after the war, when the Grand Army of the Republic organization was founded, they decided to move the Union dead to the Battle of Shiloh, which is about 2 hours north of here, maybe an hour and 45 minutes, because that has a massive Union burial cemetery. But the Confederates were left here. The Union sustained over 1,000 casualties, killed, wounded, captured. The Confederates only sustained 96 killed. That's it, 96. So that's what some people always said, as I was saying earlier, was it the genius of Forrest or was it luck? We don't know. I'll leave that up to you young historians and finders to do your research and come to your own conclusions. Now, this is a very historical cemetery and the oldest cemetery in the town of Baldwyn. Guntown in the area. It was founded in 1853, and the church I showed you a while ago, they only had a few right across the road. The church was actually across the road. It was damaged a lot, and they had to tear it down, and they built a new one up. The grave, imagine this. If you scan the graveyard, imagine only being maybe 6, 12, 15 people here. A lot of open ground. But over the course of the next 160 years, this cemetery was filled with family, loved ones, veterans, both Union and Confederate, World War II veterans, World War I, Korean, Vietnam. But most of it is family. And as you'll see a lot of Confederate battle flags around, and you'll also see a large American flag here, and you'll see more American flags down there. This is some of the oldest burial sites in North Mississippi. Not only is for Baldwyn or Guntown, it's for North Mississippi. It's actually as old, not as prestigious as the Holly Spring National Cemetery, where a lot of Civil War veterans and famous people are buried. Now, as we walk across and you see these Confederate battle flags, for instance, W.D. Brice is a Confederate Army member, and that honor cross above it is what the Confederate veterans, or the Sons of Confederate Veterans, and the Military Order of the Stars and Bars actually mark as someone who had a heroic action in the battle and was cited by the Confederate Congress. They didn't call it the Medal of Honor, they called it the Roll of Honor. And this Confederate cross is what was awarded to soldiers who actually survived the war and received awards through the UDC, United Daughters of Confederacy, United Confederate Veterans, or the Military Order of Stars and Bars. So we're sitting next to someone who did a very gallant act, selfless act in battle. Unfortunately, I don't know the information of it. Neither does the museum up here, but this right here was put in place in 1909. And I'm actually currently trying to find the Roll of Honor and other battlefield citations of Confederate and Union dead here. I've not retrieved it yet, but I'll get there. And when I do, I'll email it to your librarian teacher, and he can teach you. And then we've got these other grave sites with Confederate and Union flags. These are actually survivors of the war who, when they died, they were requested to be buried here with their brothers who died in arms in the Battle of Brice's Crossroads. For instance, this is James Walker Agnew. He was a private and the first first corporal, 127th Infantry, 32nd Mississippi Division. He died in 1955. All right. And there's actually a stamp, and most historians know that the last known Confederate veteran, died in 1959. So he was one of the last of the few who wore the gray and lived to talk about it. He is a very close relative to Reverend Agnew, okay? We don't know what his relation is, probably cousin, who knows, little brother, we don't know, but he is a relative. And
So how old was he when he was in the Civil War?
Very good question. James Walker Agnew was 16 when he enlisted in the Confederate Army. Thank you for reminding me that, yeah. 16 years old. And as you young historians will find out through your own research and reading, that a lot of the Confederate forces were young and old men towards the end of the war, because a lot of normal-aged veterans or enlistees were either wounded, maimed, they deserted, or killed in action. And the Confederacy had to survive on these young soldiers and old soldiers, either younger than 18 or older than 55. And it was very sad. But imagine the fire and the passion in somebody's, no matter what the beliefs are, to leave home at 15 and 16 and grab a rifle and go into battle with grown men. That's something nobody can ever fully grasp. I mean, it's something inside of each human that sparks a fire and a passion. And hopefully none of us will ever have that passion to grab a rifle at 16 and go join the Army. Or you won't get away with it because it's legal. But imagine if you're a sports fan, a football player, a teacher. Maybe you're an artist. That same fire in you was what was in these Confederate and Union soldiers throughout the war. Because it takes a lot of willpower and a lot of determination and a lot of sense of what you're doing is right to stay in a conflict for 4 years when you could leave at any time. And it was illegal, called desertion, but you didn't have these police systems, you didn't have computers, networks, you didn't have cameras. Most of the time when they deserted, they packed up in the middle of the night, grabbed their gear, grabbed their horse, and headed for home. And they would usually hide for a long period of time before they got home, because if you deserted in the north, the Union would send Union cavalry to the area and round up deserters. Confederate would do the vice versa. But a lot of these guys, blue and gray, they stayed on for 4 years in one of the most terrible wars in American history, and the most terrible, costly war in American history. This cost over 600,000 lives on the battlefield through wounds, disease, gunshot. If you put in the civilians, it adds over 1 million. And the era when the American population was anywhere between 17 million and 20 million. The South lost 3/4 of its male soldiers in the war. So that's why a lot of times that these UDC, Grand Army of the Republic, Union and Confederate, these organizations that were formed after the war by survivors or daughters or sons of survivors, because a lot of their story had to be told. If it wasn't for people forming organizations, working together in communities, a lot of these stories wouldn't be known. A lot of these diaries wouldn't be known. Because think about it, 3/4 of a region population gone. After the Civil War and all the way up to the 1870 census, United States 1870 census, there were more women in the South than men because of the carnage and death upon the battlefield in a war that still doesn't make sense. But right here is where Reverend Samuel A. Agnew, the pastor and reverend of Bethany Church, he has one of the best primary sources for the Battle of Brice's Crossroads. We have a lot of journal entries from soldiers, letters from home, letters after the war, maybe journals after the war. But Reverend Agnew here hid in the woods, not very far from us, with his livestock and a couple of servants, and listened to the battle, heard the cannon, heard the gunshots, wondering if his house was still standing. He left his wife and daughter up there to fend for the house, because at the time it was thought that men won't hurt women. Unfortunately, there was sad instances in the war a civil war and the war between the states, that happened. But we're looking up here that the Brice women were not harmed or injured. Servants would come in the woods, back and forth. Not only servants, neighbors. Servants and neighbors would come through the woods trying to hide from the battle, and they would intersect Reverend Agnew as well as many others. And Reverend Agnew would always ask, "What say you? What go of the battle?" It would either be, the Yankees have your house, the Confederates have your house. I don't know what's going on. It's just a bunch of dying. Well, after the war, after the battle, he came out of the woods and found that his house was still standing but riddled with bullets. The inside of his house and parts of the porch and podium was covered in blood because his house was used as a field hospital. First by the Union Army, next by the Confederate Army, and after the battle, it housed both Union and Confederate wounded. As we were standing on that monument a while ago, it don't matter if I've done this 20 times, 100 times, or 1 time, I always have a sense of goosebumps and respect at that ground, because brave men laid in that house, died of horrible wounds, survived of horrible wounds, but they all laid up, and it doesn't really make sense about the war, does it? Not many times in history do you have enemies in the same house receiving health care at the same house and getting along with each other. More times, most of the time, they knew each other. That's why they really called it a war of brother against brother, community against community. Reverend Agnew, he died in 1902, and his entire journal is up at the Brice's Crossroads Museum, and you can read fact for fact his last entry about the war. He got a letter from Distant and the newspaper about General Lee's surrender at Appomattox, and his final words about the war was, "The Confederacy is dead, we can move on. Let's rebuild, let's have peace." And that right there sums up a heart of many, many, many thousands and millions of Americans after 4 years of bloody conflict. Now, over here, we have our 96 killed in action Confederate veterans, 1 Union unknown soldier, and 1 Confederate. Now, as I said, there are 5 headstones around the cemetery that were Confederate soldiers who died after the battle in their old age and requested to be buried here with their brothers in arms. This is the body of a Union soldier that was excavated here at one point, and we didn't think it was right to send him up to Shiloh, where the Union Army and the federal government moved all the Union dead from this spot to Shiloh, because Shiloh houses a very large Union soldier cemetery, strictly Union soldiers. We put him here just to show that we're all Americans. You're not Confederate, you're not Union, you're Americans. And that 2 Americans, unknown Americans, gave their lives for a reason and a determination that only they know themselves. And these 2 are the unknown soldiers of Bethany Cemetery. 1 Confederate, 1 Union. Some of y'all may be wondering what these pennies are. As a military veteran myself, a penny is a way for any citizen to come and pay respect to the veteran dead, or any dead. So people have come by here and laid pennies. I actually laid this one down a while ago before I met your librarian, to show respect to the Union soldier and the Confederate soldier. Now, the flags above us are the flags of the 4 Confederate states that fought at Brice's Crossroads. And the middle flag is the second national flag of the Confederacy, the main banner, along with the stars and bars, the first national flag that flew amongst Forrest Cavalry Corps. The one on the right is the Tennessee flag. The one to the right of the main national flag is the Mississippi flag of 1861, the Magnolia flag that a lot of Mississippi units flew. The one to the left is the Kentucky state flag, and the one on the far left is Alabama. We erected this about 5-6 years ago in honor of not only the Confederate dead, but the Union dead. And we had a ceremony both here and at Shiloh to honor these brave veterans. And excuse that the cemetery is a little grown up. The maintenance hasn't come out here and done it. If I knew this, I actually would have got a weed eater and done this. I'm sorry. But there are 96 here killed from Kentucky. For instance, Richard Harper, Company I, 7th Kentucky Mounted Infantry, CSA. H.C. Hendricks, Company D, 16th Tennessee Cavalry. There's Tennessee, there's men from Tennessee, Kentucky, Alabama, Mississippi that gave their lives along with their brave Union brethren for a cause or a belief that they all shared deeply. Now, I'm a little partial for this because I'm from Baldwyn, and I grew up around Brice's Crossroads. This is actually what got me into history, especially with my path into education. Joseph Bishop, Company D, Moreland's Battery, Alabama Cavalry Battery, CSA, died June 10th, 1864. This is my 4th grade uncle. But just like him, so many people around here are still ancestors of many, many people around here. They're ancestors from people in Iowa, Pennsylvania, Illinois. The Union dead that were here at one time are ancestors of people all across the country. And if we go to Shiloh, you will see those same troops, and it'll have June 10th, 1864, killed in action, Battle of Brice's Crossroads. Now, right across from us is a gentleman who had specific burial details that when he dies, he wants to be in about-face posture. Now, in a military term, about-face is when you're facing one way, you just turn around 180 to another 80. Robert Adam West, Company C, 2nd Mississippi Infantry, was born in 1830 and died in 1903. He was also a Woodsman of America. That's what that stands for. When he died, as you see the penny again, when he died, he wanted his burial to be about face, facing his Confederate brothers. As you see, you can see Confederate flags, American flags. Some of these men here, some of the American flags that were here actually fought for the Union, survived. They came back to Brice's Crossroads and were buried in their church home. So this is a big lesson. Not every Northerner fought for the North. Not every Southerner fought for the South. There were a lot of instances where Southerners fought for the North. Some Northerners fought for the South, especially around Maryland, Kentucky, Missouri, some parts of Pennsylvania, and the South. A lot of Tennesseans, some Mississippians, Alabamians, Kentucky, Virginians. West Virginia actually broke off from Virginia because of that. In 1863, there were so many Unionists, as they call them historically, that supported the Union and was opposed to secession and wanted to stay a part of the Union, that they actually broke apart and created their own state, West Virginia. The Civil War caused many, many things that we feel today. Not only a change in government, not only a change in borders, but a change in how we see ourselves. Before the Civil War, guys from Mississippi, we would call ourselves Mississippians. Yeah, we would know that there was a central government, but it was a small central government. Their job was only to provide for the common defense and promote the general welfare. It wasn't until after the Civil War that Americans started, and after really Construction, 1877, when federal troops were withdrawn from all southern states with the election of Benjamin Harrison. William Henry Harrison was the 9th president of the United States, his grandfather. That Americans started seeing themselves as Americans. They didn't call themselves Mississippians, Tennesseans, Illinoisans, Pennsylvanians, Virginians, Marylands. They saw themselves as America. And when the Spanish-American War in 1898 came across, that really solidified the real stance of American pride in everyone's heart. So the Civil War had a lot of impact on our nation today, a lot. Everybody thinks it's just a battle that went for 4 years between state and state. But if you dig deeper, and I know you guys will, through your research and your studies, because I hear y'all are great historians, I know that y'all will find out for yourself what happened during the Civil War is how we're feeling it today. And that's all I really have to have for the cemetery. It was erected. Oh, come here for a second. Let me show you the cemetery. This is the Confederate grave. Almost forgot, ladies and gentlemen. Dr. J.B. Cohen is buried here. He was a Confederate major. This is a list of every Confederate killed in action. All right, and you can read there, after about 1940, a patriotic organization possibly known as the United Daughters of Confederacy, as I talked about earlier, placed 100 standard government stones inscribed with unknown. As you can see, throughout the second half of the 20th century and the development of DNA, forensics, we were able to identify these 96 killed. And that's how we identified the Union killed in action. And when we identified them, that's when the federal government and the Grand Army of the Republic, or the Union version of the Sons of Confederate Veterans, requested that the Union dead was moved from Brice's Crossroads to Shiloh to be with an entire Union dead cemetery. So when that happened, we converted this to an entire Confederate dead cemetery, or a cemetery honoring Confederate dead. But over the years and through growth and coming together, feeling ourselves as Americans, we realized, hey, we can't leave out our Union brothers. We can't. They fought here just as much as the Confederates, and they deserve as much honor as the Confederate soldiers who fought and died. So we put that unknown soldier of the Union Army to remind us. It wasn't just Confederates. There was Americans fighting against Americans, brother against brother, sister maybe going with the Confederacy, other sister maybe being a nurse in the Union, father against son, son against mother. Here's a quick little tidbit for you guys. President Abraham Lincoln's wife, Mary Todd Lincoln, her brothers fought for the Confederacy. One was killed in the Confederate Army. See, history's full of amazing jewels. You just gotta dig, you just gotta read. Because I promise you, you will not learn everything about history by watching TV or stopping in your classroom. Because as your librarian probably says, or I know he thinks, always challenge what you're told. Don't just stop in the classroom. Don't just go through a lecture or a textbook or just one book in the library about the Civil War. Go further. You'll find things like that, because I guarantee maybe none of y'all, if so, very few, didn't know that the First Lady of the United States, the wife of the President in the United States Civil War, brothers fought for the Confederacy and fought against her. And that's really about it for the cemetery. I hope you guys enjoyed this. Excuse the mess around the cemetery. Like I said, if I knew this was going to happen, I would have brought a weed eater. But this is really hallowed ground. This gives you a sense walking amongst these graves, not only these graves, but Union graves, World War II veteran graves, World War I, Spanish American, Iraq veterans, Vietnam veterans, of what it cost to live in a nation that we live in, to have the rights you do and the freedoms that you do, and never let anybody tell you different. Because men like this, especially the Union, gave their lives for an ideal that they thought so important about, or felt so deeply that they were willing to give their lives about. All right, so hope you guys think about that when you watch this video and look amongst the cemetery, and just try to put yourselves in their shoes. Would you have fought for 4 years for your home? Maybe was it about slavery? Or maybe you thought about keeping a Union Army away from your land. Maybe it was thought about keeping other soldiers off your farm or out of your state. Maybe you thought it was wrong for Army up north to send volunteers into an army up south. Who knows? The Union the other way. The Union thought, hey, slavery is awful. It's about time we end it. Or the Union must be preserved. Less than 80 years before 1861 and the start of the Civil War was 1776. When George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, Henry Payne, Benjamin Franklin, all of our founding fathers created this nation. And a lot of Union soldiers, not only Union soldiers, but a lot of Confederate soldiers Southerners who would fight for the North, thought that we're not going to let this nation break apart that we fought so hard less than a century ago to establish. So there's a lot of mixtures. Slavery was one reason, but always broaden your horizons, because roughly 9% of Southerners owned slaves. And there were 3 million people in the South, including, 9 million, but 3 million of them were about slave. And you gotta ask yourself, would the majority of American population who didn't own slaves, of course, everybody back then had the same mindset, don't get me wrong, there was prejudice, there was anger, there was racism, both North and South. But what always baffles me is, did these men laying here, or the Union men that were laid here and moved to Shiloh, did they fight for somebody else to keep somebody's slaves? You gotta think yourself. Or did they fight for somebody else to preserve the Union? Only the soldiers and the dead can tell you that. If you look up these guys' journals, and you can, through Library of Congress, Fold 3, yeah, some people out here did fight for slavery. And shame on them. I don't mean to speak ill of the dead, but we can all tell slavery was a horrible institution. It should have never happened. Unfortunately, it took a war to end it. And that's even terrible. That makes slavery even worse. But don't be fooled that every Union person fought to end slavery and every Confederate fought to keep slavery. Everybody had their own reasons for going into uniform to fight each other. And only they can truly tell us. But anyways, as the flags wave and the sun sets on these graves, I really hope you enjoyed this tour of Bethany Cemetery and the lessons of what these men can teach future generations such as yourselves.
Thank you very much.
All right.
History and Heritage Explorers would like to give a special thank you to Mr. Elliott Witt for his assistance in making this video. Remember, boys and girls, if you'd like to learn more about the U.S. Civil War, please go to your local and school library. There are many books available. Please like and subscribe and share this video, and thank you from History and Heritage Explorers.